For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1227, I call up the bill H.R. 7530, the D.C. Crimes Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 397, H.R. 7530, a bill to limit youth offender status in the District of Columbia to individuals 18 years of age or younger, to direct the Attorney General of the District of Columbia to establish and operate a publicly accessible website containing updated statistics on juvenile crime in the District of Columbia, to amend the District of Columbia Home Rule Act to prohibit the Council of the District of Columbia from enacting changes to existing criminal liability sentences and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1227, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee of Oversight and Accountability printed in the bill shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill as amended shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking gentleman and ranking member from Maryland.
Maryland.
This is the gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 7530, the D.C. Crimes Act. The Committee on Oversight and Accountability has held 3 hearings with D.C. officials. Many members of the committee have met privately with various D.C. officials to discuss the crime crisis in our nation's capital. Throughout this work, one thing has been made abundantly clear. The progressive policies of the District of Columbia City Council are simply not working. Last year, the Congress successfully blocked the D.C. Council's revised Criminal Code Act of 2022 by passing the bipartisan House Joint Resolution 26, the first law passed by the 118th Congress. That was a great first step towards addressing the rising crime in D.C., but that only kept the problem from getting much worse. The bill we are considering today expands upon that work. The D.C. Crimes Act overturns targeted portions of the D.C. Council's Youth Rehabilitation Act by amending the definition of a youth offender from a person under the age of 25 to under the age of 18. Let me restate. The D.C. Crimes Act overturns the targeted portions of the D.C. Council's Youth Rehabilitation Act by amending the definition of a youth offender from somebody under the age of 25 to under the age of 18. Currently, D.C. Code allows a criminal under the age of 25 to be given the same leniency that is afforded to minors. This bill requires that we treat adult criminals as adults like the rest of the country does. As juvenile crime soars through the district, the bill also requires the D.C. Attorney General to create a publicly available website that tracks juvenile crime data. This data will inform Congress, the district's elected officials, the Metropolitan Police Department, the public, and others on the severity of juvenile crime in the District of Columbia. Finally, the bill prohibits the D.C. Council from amending its sentencing and criminal liability laws, locking into place the current D.C. criminal law and leaving Congress as the sole authority to amend such laws in the future. The D.C. Council would have succeeded in implementing radical soft-on-crime policies if it were not for the bipartisan effort of this Congress to disapprove of the D.C. Council's legislation. Even Democratic Mayor Muriel Bowser vetoed the progressive criminal reform package, only for her veto to be overturned by the D.C. City Council. The Committee on Oversight and Accountability is committed to its constitutional responsibility to oversee the District of Columbia. We cannot allow further pro-crime policies to be put into place while this crisis continues. Citizens of D.C. and the visitors of our nation's capital deserve to feel safe. This bill is a great step towards ensuring our capital city is going to be safe. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I always appreciate the fact that the ranking member thinks so much about my future. What I think about these days are actually the people of Washington, D.C., and all of the people that come to visit the nation's capital. I also find it very interesting that, yes, the D.C. City Council finally did something on March 11th. After the Oversight Committee started working on solutions because the District of Columbia City Council refused to actually address the crime issues in D.C. until very recently. That is important for people to understand. Secondarily, we do have a constitutional obligation to the District of Columbia. The ranking member is well aware of that. And Congress does have the authority to execute that authority if the council will not do it. They have refused until very recently, and so Congress is going to assert its authority to make sure that we try to secure the district to the best of our ability. Last thing, my friend on the other side of the aisle, I would doubt anybody will confuse me with King George. I don't think we look alike. But that being said, it's very different when you're talking about a far-off capital across the ocean versus the nation's capital sitting in the federal enclave, which is the District of Columbia. Congress has a responsibility to the district, and Congress should assert that authority with this language. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's important to reassert that the Constitution is clear on this matter, that Congress does have responsibilities, and that the District of Columbia is under the District of the United States Congress. That has been clear since the beginning of the Republic. With that, I will yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only thing I would say in response to the gentleman from Maryland is that the D.C. City Council has had ample opportunity to fix these issues in D.C., and they have refused until very recently. So it's just a matter of just simple logic that unless Congress actually decides to use its authority, what would make us think that the D.C. City Council will actually act in the interest of the citizens of the district? The citizens in the district, I'm quite sure, would love to have a safe city. The issue is that the city council has not acted towards actually having a safe city, and that is a significant problem for the federal enclave because I will state again, D.C. is a federal enclave, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. The federal enclave is under the jurisdiction of the United States Congress, and we are acting under this legislation. With that, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Timmons.
Gentleman reserves. The chair would remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities toward presumptive nominees for the office of president. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find that we are at this point in a debate where my friend from Maryland has lost the debate because now he's going back talking about other things that are not about the merits of this bill. With that, I would like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Gentleman from Maryland yields. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The District of Columbia thinks that you are to be tried as a minor if you are 23 years of age. Nowhere else in the United States does that exist. Nowhere, except in the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia City Council has been derelict in its duty to actually provide for safety and security for the residents of the District of Columbia and the 19 million plus Americans who come to the federal enclave to visit the nation's capital. For all the talk of political points that have been made in this debate, that's only come from my friend on the other side of the aisle. He's talked about everything from President Trump to political talking points to political futures. He's talked very little to the reality that exists here in the nation's capital. It doesn't take much for anybody to just see, whether it's on the nightly news or frankly just walking down the streets somewhere in the District of Columbia, that something has gone very, very wrong. Even here in this very building, members and their staffs have experienced that. Our colleague from Minnesota, Representative Craig, she was assaulted in an elevator in her own apartment building. Our colleague across on the other side of this building, Senator Paul, his staffer was stabbed when walking home from work. The gentleman from Texas, the Democrat member of this chamber, Mr. Cuellar, he was robbed and carjacked with guns pointed at his head, blocks away from the United States Capitol. You see, Mr. Speaker, these are not political talking points. This is real life. And it's easy for the members to come in and out of this building when we have security apparatus around us every single day, but not take seriously what is happening in the streets of the nation's capital. This legislation takes that seriously. I will end with this. It's not a time for election year stunts. I agree with that 100%, which is why this legislation is about having structural reforms to what has happened in the District of Columbia. This is why the age for being tried as a minor is being decreased to under the age of 18, which mirrors what happens in every other part of the United States and should also occur here in the nation's capital. This is a good piece of legislation. I encourage my members, both sides of the aisle, to vote for this. We have a responsibility to provide for a safe Washington, D.C., that the citizens can enjoy and that the people of the United States can enjoy. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Florida yields back. All time for debate has expired.